Welcome to another episode of A Come Together. Welcome back to another episode, Come Together, to another solo episode today. We should hopefully have another recording with a guest by the end of this week, and if not, then I've got a bunch of guests lined up for next week and the next couple of weeks, which I'm very excited about. A little bit of traveling throughout the state of Florida, which should be fun. It's a good opportunity to visit some breweries that I love, get through the state, hit the road a little bit, and I'm really excited about that. But for today, we have another solo episode, which I am very excited about. There's, as always, a lot to talk about. There's always a lot to talk about in such a wild world. And I was just the other day when I was on my last episode, I was talking about how we live in a time where we live in a world of constant news updates and constant noise and constant shattering of perspectives and understandings and ideas that we'd previously taken for granted. And one of my concerns is that we don't give ourselves enough time to breathe and to think things out. And I've heard that people talk about this on other podcasts, and I've heard other people talk about this just in passing. That one of the dangers of technology and constant updates and constant news vomit, I guess you could call it, right? News puking, is that it doesn't give us a lot of time to settle in our thoughts and in our perspective and in our understanding what we're actually processing. And we have a lot of information that kind of strikes us as really, really urgent or really, really important. And we don't give ourselves enough time to kind of think about it, settle on it, and let these ideas and these news stories or these perspectives kind of sit, resonate, settle, think about them, think about what they mean in our lives. Are they really important as what we hear? Are they important to us? Are they important to people around us? How does this information fit into the grand scheme of our perspective, our lives, our society, and our culture? And I don't think we spend quite enough time doing that and thinking about that. And I'm personally enormously addicted to this news cycle. I love it. I love getting this new information. I love getting this feedback. I love the feeling of feeling like I'm learning something new, that I'm constantly on the cutting edge of what the news is and what the most up-to-date understanding on any given topic is. It's fun. It's addicting. And I have to really put a lot of effort into kind of pulling myself away from it, and I feel it happening. It happens to me. It happens to me on any kind of downtime that I have. I'm just driving. If I'm driving to a supermarket 10 minutes away, I don't just drive to the supermarket. I drive to the supermarket while I'm listening to a podcast about the most recent X, Y, and Z, or while I'm scrolling through Twitter. I still have not re-downloaded the app on my phone, which I'm very happy about, but I feel that pull. I feel that it's just this. It's the same kind of pull that I think dependencies, which I've had different waves of with different. I'm not even just going to call them vices because they're not always vices, right? Dependencies don't have to be on something negative, but you feel that urge. You feel that like overwhelming feeling kind of taking over you. Like I've got to have this. I got to find out what's happening. I gotta have that beer. I gotta have that. I gotta smoke that cigar. I gotta go on that jog. And these feelings kind of we get kind of overrun with a surge of desperation and desire that I have to go ahead and I have to do this, and I just need to see the news for a minute and then I'll be fine. I just need to take, just a couple of sips of beer and I'll be fine. I just need to go for a jog and all my problems, all my headspace will be resolved. We know that's obviously not the case, and there are of course healthier habits that you could be quote unquote dependent on, that can be part of your routine, and then there are a lot less healthy habits. And it takes a lot of effort to get myself to kind of sit in that silence. And I did mention, I think also in the most recent podcast that I recorded, the solo episode, I think it was 94, that you know, I think that I've noticed that when I have Saturdays or Shabbat as a break, um, it really does give me a recharge. It really does provide that space for my head and my body and my thoughts to kind of realign, reintegrate, and just gives it the space to kind of breathe. And then, I mean, it almost really feels like a fast. It almost feels like if you're fasting for a day and you didn't drink any water, you didn't eat any food, and you're going around your schedule and you're kind of, you're okay, but you're tired and you're kind of a little cranky and you're a little low on nutrition or nourishment, and then you go and you break your fast and you drink that bottle of water, you drink that cup of coffee, or you have that first snack that you didn't, when you didn't eat all day, and you kind of everything kind of just comes rushing back, and you say, okay, that's great, that feels so much better. And I have that feeling when I, turn on my phone on Saturday night and I get back on and I reconnect, and I don't know if that's necessarily quite the healthiest place to be, but I do know that it's a lot healthier than to not have that break at all. And so I've been kind of putting a lot of conscious effort and energy into holding myself back and just letting myself be a little bit and not looking for the next distraction and just kind of sitting with my thoughts a little bit. My wife is really excellent at that, actually. Like, she does not care very much for external stimulation all the time, and she's very happy sitting with her thoughts and thinking. There's times on Saturdays or Shabbat where I'll be reading a book, and then I'll go for a walk, and then I'll come back and I'll read another book, and I'll talk, and what's on your mind, let's catch up, let's talk. And there's very little time for just kind of being. And it's funny because I've been here, this notion of just letting yourself be for a little bit actually has been relevant in my life for over a decade, or probably the better part of a decade now. Actually, almost exactly, right? Since 2015, when I got into Binghamton. And I thought my professor was kind of a idiot for saying this, or at least I didn't think that this particular idea was very valuable. But he used to talk about how creatives need a lot of time to kind of do nothing. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, why? What are you talking about? Of course you don't need to be doing nothing. And he always says, it's important to kind of give yourself time to let ideas percolate and to go for walks and to have a lot of excess time where you can just kind of be with yourself. And the more time that we spend in our own heads, the more contemplative, self-aware, and and familiar with ourselves it can be. And it's not always a pleasant experience. A lot of times people want that distraction. A lot of times people don't like to live with the struggles in their head and the noise in their head, and so they'd rather tune that out with some kind of external stimulation, myself included. Like, everything I've just described for the last 8.5 minutes was pretty much me admitting that I have this problem myself. I was listening to a really, really interesting podcast a couple of days ago from Diary of a CEO, which I think that Stephen Bartlett, who's the guy the host of the show, he's been doing a really, really, really great job. I know he's always done a really great job, but he's doing a really, really great job, I think, recently, hosting some fun debates, having some really out-of-the-box and interesting guests. And I do aspire to actually have guests like him. I don't necessarily need for them to be CEOs of their own company or, self-starters per se, but he gets a lot of people that are just outside the box, corrupt cops or, you know, um, you know, different types of specialists, or if it comes to the medical industry, or, really just a lot of people that kind of found their own way and fell off the beaten path. And then he has a platform that allows these people this kind of voice and to kind of get this whole self-starting perspective to be part of the zeitgeist, which I think is really, really valuable, really, really beautiful, and actually the answer to a lot of problems that we've been talking about, a lot of problems that exist in today's society. This particular debate was about relationships, and it was with Scott Gallaway and a woman named Logan Uri, or Yuri. I'm not sure how to pronounce her last name, so I apologize. And I have a lot of mixed thoughts on Scott Galloway. It's funny because I read years ago when I was in college, I think in 2016. In 2016, I found a book that he had written called I think the Four Horsemen, and it was talking about Google, Facebook, Apple, and maybe Microsoft. I don't remember, but the four big tech companies at the time. And I remember reading the book and initially being really, really uh, engrossed in the book and really, really being captured immediately because Scott Galloway happens to be very, very, very articulate, eloquent, intelligent, has a lot of really, really interesting points. And what's really cool is he kind of lays it all out on the table as to where he gets his perspective and understanding and philosophy from. Like he's very clear as to where the root is of his train of thought and perspective. And so it's fun because he's clearly, when you hear him talk at least, and I think that, I mean, I've had a lot more pleasant experiences listening to his podcast than reading his writing. Um, I think in his podcast, he's much more quick to say, this is where I come from, this is my perspective, this is my opinion. And in his books, he's comes across as much more authoritative, which can lead to, hey, I hear where you're coming from, but I don't know, this kind of just sounds more like your opinion than what actual, you know, um, interconnected reality is. And the reason why I say interconnected is because, there are certain people that kind of observe truths that streak through everything, and then there are people that offer their opinions on people, events, companies. I kind of consider myself a blend of the two. I don't think I have really many universal trends that I think about that are uniquely my ideas, interconnected perspectives that are uniquely mine. But actually, I had a rabbi when I was studying in Israel for the year abroad, and he used to say he was one of the smartest guys I knew. So eloquent, so articulate, such a great speaker. It's crazy. He used to give these classes, and he'd be able to speak for anywhere between 45 minutes and 2 hours. I think that you can maybe count on one hand or a couple of fingers the amount of times that he would say the words or so or like. Every single word that he said was intentional, thought out, and flowed really, really, really beautifully. And it's an art. I mean, the art of speaking and the art of conversation and the art of expressing yourself without using filler words is really, really, it's a beautiful art. And it's something that I think a lot of people have a really hard time with because because if we're not confident in what it is that we're saying, then we're far more inclined to use filler words as opposed to just expressing our ideas. And it's something that I think quite a bit about. But he used to say, and he was obviously being very modest and almost, almost, not authentic when he used to say, but maybe he really believes it, I'm not sure, that he used to say, I'm not so smart myself. I just listen to a lot of really smart people and can identify really intelligent things that they're saying and then repeat them myself. So he kind of removes the credit from himself and considers himself to be a verbal spokesman for these really great ideas and perspectives that other people have come up with. I kind of consider myself the same way. So this debate that happened on this Diary of a CEO wasn't so much a debate as much as a conversation, which I was very happy about, because I find that debates, or when you have a debate, typically speaking, most of the time they kind of come with, almost attached to a debate has to be some kind of sense of drama, gotcha isms. You're trying to put someone down. Oh, I gotcha. What do you have to say about that? Or, oh, do you say that you don't care about children, blah blah blah? And like a lot of that kind of debating, in my opinion, is bad faith. I think a good debate is probably having two people with two different perspectives and professional backgrounds and different roots of their education and understandings on life, and they're able to come together and kind of meld it into something that is greater than the individual components. I mean, I've talked before, and I will very likely continue talking for a very long time about the idea that when you put two ideas together, when you put two people together, you have a conversation with two people as opposed to one, that the conversation becomes greater than the individual components of some of its parts. And I actually think that also happens, for example, on something like this, on a solo podcast where someone is talking and expressing an idea for an extended period of time. I'm talking for 16 minutes right now, which is probably longer than most people typically monologue almost ever. And ways to kind of, and I'm getting my ideas out there, but I'm really fleshing them out in my head and trying to put eloquent and useful and the best fitted words to my to the episode. And by doing that, my ideas become far more developed as they're spoken out than if they were just kind of rattling around inside my head. And I think that a lot of people have that experience. A lot of people understand, even if they have never put those kind of these exact words to it. I think a lot of people understand the idea that talking something out typically leads to something greater than just thinking thoughts or sitting in your thoughts, even though there's value to both of them, of course. So this debate that went on was a Scott Gallaway, who I have a little bit of experience with, just listening to maybe it's a dozen or so podcasts that he's been on or that he's hosted, and Logan Ury. And they were talking about the dating epidemic in the world, and they were talking about the relationship epidemic in society, which is certainly a massive, massive issue that really has to be kind of talked about and resolved and acknowledged. And we, as a world, or at least as a society, American society, have been moving for, everything's a pendulum, and there's kind of different swings and different way, everyone's roles kind of swing back and forth, and responsibilities swing back and forth, and societal expectations for what people's roles are swing back and forth. And then you have these kind of growing pains where a world changes and technology changes and values change and shift. And there are going to be people that are inherently kind of left in the dust. And there are going to be people that figure out how to adapt. And then the people that adapt first find a way to capitalize either by taking advantage of the people that have not yet adjusted, or they could capitalize by helping the people that have not yet adjusted become better adjusted, and creating that kind of value from building people up, as opposed to creating value out of a broken world or a broken culture or a broken society, is kind of, I think, the two paths that people take. And one is easier and one is a lot harder, but one is ultimately a lot more beneficial for everyone, and one is ultimately a lot more harmful to everyone except for yourself. And obviously, I'm sure, I'm sure that you can tell which one is which, right? In the sense that, or in other words, if there is a enormous issue in today's society, which there is, with men in the world and them feeling like they don't know what their place is in terms of relationships. They don't know what their place is in terms of expectations of raising a family, supporting a family, are men supposed to be emotional? Are men supposed to be emotionally eloquent? Are they supposed to share the weight of their emotions and the burden of their experiences with their family, with their kids, with their partners? Are they supposed to keep that locked up, or is it supposed to be something that you kind of deal with, that you deal with quietly on your own? And everyone has different expectations and understandings as to what that is. And I don't obviously think or claim to know. Actually, forget about know. I will insist that there is no set method that's good for everyone. Some people really find themselves to be most productive if they just have one little quiet outlet, that they have a way of getting them, a way of kind of, I guess, wiping their slate clean at the end of the week or at the end of the day. And that might be a therapist, that might be their spouse, that might be a good friend that they could just sit around and have a beer with and talk about the week. Um, and some people, like myself, aren't just satisfied with having that, but feel the need to be eloquent, to interact with the world with a sense of emotional awareness and emotional care and support. I think that I have it's really thrown off a lot of my friends and a lot of people that I've spoken to. But one of the questions I love to ask people, all my friends, strangers, podcasts, off the record, on the record, is, why is that? What do you feel about that? How does that make you feel? That must be so hard. What was your perspective going into it or going through it? And I I personally find that that the way that I feel that my emotional stability is best, and that I feel like I'm contributing to the world and having the most productive type of relationships and conversations, is through that realm of emotional conversation. And I think that, I mean, it obviously works to a certain degree, because I'm very lucky to have a large network of people that I feel very close to, that feel like they can trust me, that feel like we can have open, honest conversations, as opposed to relatively superficial ones. So one of the things that Scott Gallaway apparently has been championing for many years, and I learned this through my friend Ari Mendelo, who, he and I generally tend to see eye to eye on a lot of things. The way that they manifest and the conclusions we come to might not necessarily be the same, but I think we're on the same page for a lot of our values and ideas for the most part. And he's been listening to Scott Galloway for a long time. Oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't even finish getting to my idea. So he wrote this book about the four henchmen, and then in the book, so he started talking about the company, and he started talking about statistics and the success and the measure of their power, and the great lengths of control over culture and society and the consumer and the market that these companies have. And then he went ahead and kind of put in his own personal, this is probably 30, 40, 50 pages in. He starts putting in his own personal opinions into the book, which obviously he's more than welcome to and entitled to. I didn't find, but I kind of get rubbed the wrong way if someone says their opinion as an authoritative matter that is decided and settled, as opposed to saying, this is just what I think the issue is and this is the problem. So, for example, he talked about in this book, he talked about Apple, the company, and then he talked about what a crappy human being Steve Jobs was. And he kind of spent a good portion of the segment talking about Apple, kind of ragging on Steve Jobs. And I'm not going to sit here and defend all of Steve Jobs' bad decision making. I'm not going to sit here and defend the personal decisions that Steve Jobs made that I, in a million years, would never have made, and the way that I interact with people, that I would never interact with people like that. It's just not, it's not in my blood. It's not my DNA. I hate confrontation. I hate being mean to people. I hate just there's just a lot there's a lot of ways that Steve Jobs would behave that don't necessarily fit into the way that I would behave. But I also understand that I'm not the person starting Apple, changing literally the world. I mean, Steve Jobs has to be one of the most culturally and societal, I guess socially significant human beings in the last 100 years, or maybe even ever. Forget about 100 years, almost ever. It's actually kind of my personal opinion that I think that Elon Musk kind of overtook Steve Jobs in terms of relevance and greatness. Again, not when it comes to personal decision making, and not when it comes to the ways that they manifest their relationships in their personal lives, because that's none of my business, and that has nothing to do with the work that they do and the companies they create and the value they create and the way that they change the world and their imprint on humanity, you know. Um, and so I kind of was off put by that. And then when I listened to Scott Gallaway talk on podcasts, he seemed to be a lot more eloquent, and not only a lot more eloquent, but a lot more open to talking about the idea that these are his ideas and these are his concepts and his notions and his understanding of things coming from his experiences in the world that he exists in and that grew up in. Um, but he does really, truly, oh man, so wonderfully hit the nail on the head in terms of what the problem for a lot of men in today's world is. And some of it is so practical, and some of it is so important, and some of it is so special. And one of the things he talks about is this notion of loneliness, and is this notion of the fact that men are kind of being told for the first time, first, hey, your job is not to be necessarily 100% a supporter, but what women are looking for is a supporter, even though we live in a world where where women have you have to go to the podcast to check it out. I'm going to put the link on the show note captions, where women from I think age 20 to 30 have higher rate of employment, higher rate of college graduation, higher salary. I think after 30 they say it goes down once a woman generally starts having family and kids, and the way that they invest their time and efforts uh, does not become single tracked. You have to split up the way that you spend your time and divvy your efforts into a combination of work and home and children and relationships and responsibilities. And not to say that that is a bad thing. I think that's actually a beautiful thing. And it's funny because we live again in America. The definition of what success is how high up you are on some kind of corporate ladder, how prestigious you are, how much money you make. Whereas I've been saying for as long as I've had this podcast, and far longer than that, that the measure of success is whatever it is that you feel like is your purpose or your mission is, and how good you are at achieving that. And so, if your purpose and mission is to raise a family, and you raise a family of 4, 5, 6 people, and each one of them have their own personalities, and each one of them have kind of grown into their own paths, and you've helped forge them that way. And you're able to still maintain a job that you're doing well at, that you're excelling at. And even though you're, let's say, putting in 8 hours a day instead of 14 hours a day, and instead of 14 hours a day of working, you're splitting up your time 8 hours with 8 hours at your job, 2 hours with your kids, spending time with them and making sure that they feel loved and that they feel like they have a role model in their lives and they feel like they have someone looking after them. And then you have an hour where you have a relationship with your husband, and an hour where you work out, and then you go to sleep, and you're like, whoa, like, okay, so I may not move my way up in the company as quickly as I used to. I may not make as much money, or my bonuses may not be as large as they used to be, but I'm so successful. I've got a family that I love. I've got kids that are going to make this world a better place, that are going to be part of society because of my time, because of my efforts, because of my physical, emotional, mental investment, financial, investment into this world. And so I think that the yardstick that a lot of people are using to measure, oh yeah, well, women's success starts dropping off at the age of 30. I mean, listen, let's talk about, of course, each case has their own merit and and has to be examined in their own way. But I would look at, okay, so if they fall off on, instead of making 10% bonus or 20% bonus every year, they make a little bit less, and they still maintain their jobs and they still maintain their responsibilities and they're still doing well. But now you can point at several other factors in their lives that they're really excelling in, that they're really finding a way to balance. And by the way, balance is one of the hardest things that anyone has, that anyone could try to find to come to terms with. I'm showing one of my 12th grade high school class now. One of my favorite movies ever. It's called Saving Mr. Banks, and it's a Disney movie, and it's definitely been Disney-fied. Of course, you can't pretend otherwise. But the movie is about it's set in the 19, I think 50s or 60s, about Walt Disney and and the company, the Sherman Brothers and Don DeGrady, who is the scriptwriter for Mary Poppins, and how Walt Disney and the company got the rights to the book Mary Poppins rather, and to turn it into a movie, and what the progress of turning a book and the process of turning a script into a film looks like, and especially with the musical and adding songs and adding lyrics and working with the artist and working with the author of Mary Poppins, who's played by, oh my God, I'm going to go crazy. Tom Hanks plays Walt Disney. Emma Thompson plays P.L. Travers, who's the author of Mary Poppins, and and the book goes back and forth between. Sorry, the movie goes back and forth between the narrative of making the film, and then Helen Goff's, who's really P.L. Travers, that's her real name. Helen Goff's childhood, and her relationship with her family and her father, and her alcoholic, lost but loving father, who could not, who was so weighed down by the world and so weighed down by his demons that it drove him to alcoholism, and 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 ultimately caused him to fail as a father and a husband and employee. He worked at a bank. He was a bank manager, and one of the beautiful and haunting, and I don't even know necessarily how accurate this rendition of the story is, because obviously it's Hollywood, and obviously it's Disney, and obviously Disney's producing a movie about Disney working with someone that doesn't like Disney, so they're going to make it seem a lot more propagandized towards Disney, I guess. And this isn't me, hating on the company. Everyone does this, and it's not just Disney. Any biopic or any movie about that are based on real events obviously take as many creative liberties as the executives or as the producers or as the director wants or as the studio wants. So I don't know how accurate the story is, but I do know that the notion of a father feeling the weight of the world and the weight of responsibility and feeling absolutely trapped and having absolutely no way out, having no way that he lives a life that he hates 95% of it, and he hates 95% of his conscious waking time in this world, and how that does not work, how it just does not work. And the theme of the movie was pull yourself together for your family, pull yourself together for your daughters, pull yourself together for your wife. And he tries, and he's sad, and he cries, and he wants to, and he's like, and he's sitting there, and it's one of the sad. It's truly one of the most heartbreaking and heart wrenching portrayals. Colin Farrell, who's one of my favorite actors, I love him. I think he's awesome. Colin Farrell plays the father, plays the lost father, who ultimately Mr. Banks is actually based on, and even though this movie takes place in the 50s or the 40s or even earlier than that, right? Because it's when the author of Mary Poppins is growing up. So this is, the early 1900s. Not much has changed today, right? I mean, people still have jobs that they hate, but instead of having jobs that they hate and then taking on responsibilities and trying to figure out a way to balance it, people try to find themselves and shirk and avoid responsibility until they feel that they're quote unquote ready. And I don't necessarily know, speaking from firsthand experience and speaking as someone that lives in a world where most people by the time they're 30 are married with a family, kids, and a job and potentially a mortgage or paying rent or just genuine, real responsibilities. I mean, like a lot of I don't think anyone is necessarily ready for any of this until it happens, right? And one of the most important things that I think that you can teach any man, that any man can learn for himself, is feeling that sense of comfort with yourself that will be the source of passion and energy and the spark that keeps you going day after day after day after day, where you have to pay bills and you don't know where the money's going to come from, and you have to and your kid's crying at 2 o'clock in the morning, and you know you have to get up for a job the next day, and you love your kids so much that you just hold them and you hug them, and you know that you're gonna and you take care of them, and the feeling of your child in your arms getting soothed by just your presence, just the feeling of you embracing them and feeling cared for and feeling loved and comforted. Just that alone is such an enormous source of love and warmth and passion that really keeps you going for a little bit longer. But if you put and I can't and I will I don't I'm not going to stand here and insist that that's all you need, because we know that's not true. We know that taking on responsibilities before you're necessarily ready for them is not going to be a magic solution to dealing with each and every one of our own inner demons and ghosts. But it helps. But it gives you a push. It gives you an extra little boost. It gives you an extra little desire to say, this is ultimately what I'm here for. What are we here for? Part of the, and we have kind of, we kind of split. I think that people, we look at our lives like a combination of community, depending how big our community is, right? Our community could just be our wives and kids and parents and siblings. Our community could be a group of friends. Our community could be the job that we work in, and the people that we work with, and so a sense of community and a sense of individuality, and a sense of, this is who I am in the larger picture of things. And one of the things that I love asking my friends about, and I love talking to people about, and I'm actually going to start bringing up pretty, in my interviews and my podcasts more often, I think, is the idea that what about you? What makes, if tomorrow you were gone and someone swapped you out for another person that will go through the motions that you go through, will your job notice? Will your wife notice? Will you notice? Is your life on some kind of default where you kind of go through the motions constantly without really thinking about what you're doing and the way that you're doing it and who you are? Or are you just kind of, you have a bunch of check boxes that you're filling every single day, and you do them and then you go to sleep and you do them again the next day? And I think that we haven't really found a good way or a great way to articulate that we really need both, that we really need some kind of sense of self and individuality, and that's really important, and that's kind of where we are today. But when you have that kind of sense and individuality, it almost comes in conflict with the responsibilities of joining a community. Again, community doesn't have to necessarily mean community as far as wife and kids, but a sense of embodied people that you're close to, that you invest in, that that you can care for, and that can grow and become themselves as a direct consequence of your investment in those people. That's kind of why I find, and I find that, that's the balance that I'm living on a day-to-day basis, where I do sales and I have work and I have passions, and and I have and I do what I have to do to pay bills and make money and be responsible for my family, right? And on the other hand, I have my individual endeavors that I have to that I need to take care of, and I need to nourish. I need to jog. I need to have a creative outlet. I need to be able to put I need to share with people. I need to talk to people. I love to have community. I love to help people discover things about themselves and become better, and then to watch. And I love to hear about people's success, and I love to hear, and I love to participate in some, and the other week I recorded one of my favorite episodes. I said this before, and I'll say it again, with Courtney Barnes, who is this amazing, eloquent, super sweet lawyer living in Texas right now, but really had lived all over her entire life. And we're talking about her journey. We're talking about the steps that she took to really kind of become the best person that she could be. And at the end of the interview, I said, "Listen, I don't know you. I've never met you in person. You and I had spoken once or twice on the phone prior to doing this podcast, but I'm just so proud of you. I'm just so happy that you're doing this, and I'm so happy that I get to share with you and hear about the way that you went beyond yourself and broke the barriers that have been, that either have been placed in front of you or that you've placed in front of yourself, and to participate in that. And I'm so lucky able to do that. And I think that a lot of, so I think that 50 years ago or 100 years ago, men had no sense of individuality. Men had no sense of what are my passions. Instead, what men would focus on is, I'm a caretaker. I'm a provider. I'm here to help the people around me. And men burned out from that. And we had like a collapse of well-being and father figures, and we screwed up. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to say that. We didn't screw up. Everyone did their best, but everyone was not very well equipped for when we don't have a sense of self. It's very hard to have close relationships with other people. If you don't love yourself, you don't know how to love other people. If you don't know how to get over your demons, if you don't know how to look at your demons in the eye and say, I know who you are, I recognize where you come from, and I'm not going to let you take over the next generation. I'm not going to let you keep this chain of pain and loss and despair, and I'm going to break out of it. I'm going to break out of it for my family's sake and for my grandkids' sake and for the whole world of the future's sake. um and I'm not going to do that. And then and those are so that was one generation, and then our generation has been the generation of what I feel, and maybe I'm wrong, and I'm totally okay with being wrong, and I'd love to be proven wrong, or at least given some numbers, or given some kind of I'd love to have a back and forth about this. But now we live in a world where men don't want responsibility, where men only care about how do I express myself, my community. I want to do what I'm in the mood of. I want to do what I feel. I want to do what I feel like. There was, a famous interview with Seth Rogen, and it really broke my heart. And I mean, I don't want to, and I'm sure listen, however, whatever his opinions are his opinions, and they can't be wrong for him. But he was saying, I read I guess article, or I heard a recording about what he was talking about, not wanting to have kids ever. And he's like, I want to wake up, I want to roll over, I want to smoke a J, and I and I want to go about my day and do what I want to do. And when you have kids crying in your ear at 5 o'clock in the morning or 6 o'clock in the morning, or you have to drive your kid to school, you can't smoke a J in the car when you're doing that, and I don't want to deal with that. And basically what he was saying was, just not in as many words, I I am focused on my individual life, and I'm not interested in the life of responsibility. But I think that that lack of community and responsibility ultimately leads to what is the loneliness epidemic. Because I think that so the way that I like to think of it is, we start off as a tiny little snowball in a beautiful, enormous field, or just countryside, after a footfall, after a massive snowstorm, and we're a little snowball. Now we could stay where we are, and we could stay the same size, but if we start rolling downhill, or if we start rolling around, then we pick up more snow, and it starts getting packed into us, and the snowball gets bigger. And not only does it get bigger, but it gets thicker and it gets heavier and it lasts longer. And then, I mean, I have a picture from when I was in high school with maybe 4 or 5 different friends. And there was one weekend, it was late. I remember, I grew up in New York and I grew up upstate, about an hour, half an hour, 45 minutes north of Manhattan. And far enough from Manhattan that the weather was pretty different. So if it was 30 degrees in Manhattan, it could have been 20 degrees where I was living and snowing, and it could have been 30 degrees and raining in Manhattan. Um, and my friends and I were in high school, and it was late March, and it doesn't usually snow, but we got hit with the cold front, we got hit with a snowstorm, and my friends and I went to the backyard and we built a huge snowman. I mean, I haven't grown since at that point in high school, so I was probably around the same height. I was probably 6'3", 6'4", and we built a snowman that was taller than me. And the truth is, we really needed all hands on deck because, as we were rolling the snowballs and getting the base bigger and bigger, and then we had to pick up the second part of the snowman and then the head, and each one, was enormously heavy because, again, the snow's packed up. Um, that snowman lasted months into in my friend's backyard, and that snowman lasted a long, long time, far past, far further. It lasted far longer than the rest of the snow on the ground or the other snowmen that we built lasted, right? And I think that this metaphor for the way that people are is exactly like that snowman, right? We start off as these snowballs, and as we extend our sense of community, and as we extend our responsibilities, and as we have more and more people in our lives, and they're people that we're close with, that count on us, that we teach and that we learn from, we become bigger snowmen, and we become or bigger snowballs, and it becomes harder and harder to melt us. And we kind of build up this really enduring strength and this really enduring passion. And, and this is no secret. This is, Viktor Frankl's famous hypothesis or observation in Man's Search for Meaning, that when people have something to live for, we survive a lot more strenuous and challenging times. And so we live in a world today where people are much more inclined to be self-expressive. We want to be our own snowball, and we don't want to look like other snowballs, but we're not doing what we need to do to kind of keep on packing on more snow to ourselves. And I think that hurts. I think that it's a problem. And I think that what would likely make this better is this new perspective of blending responsibility with individuality. And it's funny because my whole life I'd really been in love with entertainment. That's movies, TV shows, music, whatever it is. And one of the reasons that I find it so attractive and so amazing is that it changes people, and you can have an influence on people. And Hollywood was built on the backs of, everyone. You had to travel out west, and it still is that kind of, that kind of way. But it's built on the back of people that are dreaming of a world greater than what they exist in right now. And they take those dreams and they bring them to life, and they use them as inspiration for the world around them. And people, and it's so real, and it touches people so deeply, and it's so true. And the human experience is so valuable. And you go through some of the most famous filmmakers ever. You go through some of the most famous movies ever, and what people love about them isn't just, the action and the gore. It's the pursuing the dream that comes to fruition. And it gives us and it kind of reignites that light, that match of passion and dreams and desire and goals that we experience. My life, I remember the feeling when I watched Dead Poet Society for the first time, and I was, I was 20. No, how old was I? I wasn't 20. I was 19. I was in Israel for the year again on my year abroad, and one of my friends, Devere, actually showed me this movie, and he And we watched Dead Poet Society, and he told me, leave your phone out of the room. I don't want you going on your phone while you watch this movie. I said, okay. He goes, it's important to just pay attention to every detail. It's important to pay attention to the music. It's important to pay attention to the directing, the cinematography, the acting, the writing. I said, okay, great. And we sat down and we watched it. And my whole life, I was lost. I never really knew what I wanted to do. Actually, it's funny because I just texted, and recently I've discovered that I think that that podcasting and this podcast is really my calling. Is really what I think that I can the way that I can express myself best and make the biggest and most positive impact on the world in. And but I didn't have that at the time. I didn't have anything near that. And I watched that movie and I walked away and I just said, I can do anything. I can do anything with my life. I walked away with a newfound sense of hope and a newfound sense of love and a newfound sense of optimism for the future. And I don't know that movies necessarily do that so much anymore. And obviously, yes, there are exceptions from time to time, but that wasn't what filmmaking was. That's what filmmaking was about. And now it doesn't feel that way. In the last couple of in the last couple of years, the last bunch of years. And yeah, again, of course, I'm not going to say that that's a rule. There was exceptions to there was exceptions, and there are always movies that do come along and change people's lives. Of course, I'm not going to deny. Of course, but it's a lot less common. And I think that what people have found recently is that and that's why it almost, you feel like there's like bro, quote unquote, bro culture that comes with the podcasting world. I don't think that it's a bro culture. I think that it's a culture that of people that have found that balance between individuality and professionalism, and the people that find the balance between responsibility and being themselves, and then spreading that information. And men who have been lost and don't know how to balance the two are caught on fire from this type of content because for the first time, it gives people a way out. For the first time, you can learn without having to necessarily spend $50,000 going to college for a semester. You can listen to the top scientists of the world, or the top doctors, or top researchers, or top historians in the world for free. And then you can hear their background, and you can hear the stories of how they found ways to blend raising a family and making a difference in this world. And you find how they get married and how and the struggles they went through with their relationships while they were trying to find themselves, and how they found a way to how they found a way to work through everything, and now they would never trade their experiences for anything in the world. And we need that, and we want that. And I hope that we're heading towards time now. I mean, I'm filled with an enormous amount of hope for the future, because I feel like we keep on looking at individual components without taking a step back to look at the big picture. And if we want, and if we know the right balance to strike, we live in a world today where we could reach that balance, and it's just about opening our eyes and our ears and our hearts to it. And I have a lot more I have a lot more to say on this. I have a lot more I feel about this. But I think that if there's one thing to if there's a couple of things to walk away from after listening to this episode, number one is that, just because you read someone or hear someone express themselves in one medium doesn't mean that that's all that they are. And we have to give people more chances, right? Scott Gallaway, I'm far more inclined to appreciate what he has to say and listen to what he has to say after listening to his podcast, as opposed to just listening to a book and discrediting the guy entirely. Number two is finding finding a sense of responsibility in your life, and finding things to be proud to be responsible for. I don't care whether it's taking care of a plant. I don't care whether it's a hobby. I don't care whether it's a family. I don't care whether it's a community that you're investing in. Something that you can something that you can contribute to, that you can kind of see the fruits of your labor, and hopefully it manifests in humanity and life. And then finally, that form of self-expression, and finding a way to blend the two. And to finally, the last idea and the most important, I think, is throw away the stupid measures of success based on how much you're climbing up the corporate ladder. Throw away the metrics of success based on how much money you're making after the age of 30. You know what? I'm sorry. Forget all the people that tell you that if I mean that the only way that you can be successful, the only way that you can be happy in your life is by working your way up and making a lot of money. Your life is a combination of a bajillion different facets that each one of them, depending on who you are, holds different value. And pursue the ones that have the most value to you. Feel as though you're doing the best that you could, and you're going to have a much, much healthier, happy life, perspective, and way that you treat people. Just some thoughts for today. Hope to have another couple of episodes out in the next couple of days. If not, a bunch of guest episodes next week. And love you all. Looking forward to seeing you soon.